Episode 111. In 1911, Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian, who initially started off in medicine but then pivoted to polar exploration, in 1911 he became the first person to reach the South Pole. Beyond MD, episode 111, here we go! Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Beyond MD podcast. That story about Roald Amundsen, I first learned about it in Essentialism by Greg McKeown, which is a wonderful book, highly recommended. First off, thank you to everybody who has signed up for my newsletter. I'm happy to say that everything is sorted out, so now you can expect to receive an issue of the newsletter bi-weekly. It's going to come on Fridays, which happens to be my favorite day to sit down and catch up on reading. If you're interested in signing up, you can head to beyondmd.ca and just hit the newsletter tab and enter your email. So today, we are going to be diving back into the wealth formula. And let's remind ourselves that this formula has 4 steps. The first step is generating a steady income. We talked about this in the most recent episode. The next step is meaningful spending. So aligning spending with our value system. Step 3 is investing the difference. And step 4 is knowing our definition of enough. The focus of today's episode is going to be step 2, which is meaningful spending. And I find this step to be truly fascinating because it is one that is mostly within our control. Important to remember that these 4 steps of the wealth formula, they need to be followed in sequence, and each step is just as important as the other. So first, let's talk about our spending pie chart. This is going to be individual for you, but if you are in Canada, especially in a higher cost of living area, which many of us are, you're naturally going to spend a lot in category number 1, which is housing, especially if you own your home. The next biggest category is this other category, and into this I lump in things like travel, maybe private school for your kids, and then professional insurance and home insurance. And then categories 3 and 4 consist of your vehicle costs, and also food, groceries, and eating out. So I'll talk about my experience with this spending pie chart. For us, being in the GTA, we made a decision that we're likely going to be spending a little bit more on our home, but this is an area of our life that we value. We spend a lot of time together as a family at home, so it's an expense that we are okay with. Moving down the list here, I decided from day one, cars were never really my thing. I started off with an Infiniti Q50, and I can tell you the drive was fun, the horsepower was great, Rohan in the back seat would squeal when I would accelerate the car, but those memories were really short-lived because whenever I took the car in for servicing, I would wind up with a $600 service charge each and every time, and I quickly downgraded to a Mazda. I now have a Mazda CX-50, and when I had the Mazda CX-5, 3 years ago, I got an incredible deal. I was paying like $495 a month all in. It was incredible. Now it's not so cheap, but still the car gets me from A to B and it checks off the boxes for me. So I don't spend a lot on car, but one area where I do spend a lot on is toll highways. I live right by the 407. And so this is an area where I am bleeding cash, but I am happy to do so. Let me tell you why. I calculated that each trip to school and back, I save around 10 minutes on the 407. This results in about 90 minutes of saving per week, 6 hours per month, and 3 days or more every single year. I am more than happy to spend to get at least 3 days back of time each and every year. Funny story about the 407. When we moved from Alberta, I had my Alberta license plates, and after riding the 407 for a couple months, I realized I had not gotten a bill. And so I called up the 407 and I told them, listen, I haven't gotten a bill. I'm just calling in, trying to do the right thing. And they said, sir, which jurisdiction are your license plates from? And I said, they're from Alberta. We recently moved here. And they said, oh, that's because we don't bill Alberta license plates. And here's my dirty little secret. I still, jokingly, I have those Alberta license plates stashed away somewhere in the house. And people from time to time will make an offer. But of course, I'm riding with my Ontario plates, always have been for the last 7 or 8 years. So let's keep moving down these categories. We talked about housing, we talked about cars and transportation, and now let's talk about food. This is an area where I do cut costs quite dramatically. I don't buy food at work, I take leftovers, and we tend not to eat out very much. And then finally, the other category, we do spend a lot here. Back in the day, we were able to dramatically cut costs on home insurance. We were with Chubb, and it was almost $9,000 a year. And then moving to the personal, I cut it by more than 60%. So that was a great saving there. Private school ended up being a great fit for our kids, so that is something we have decided to stick with. And then travel. Travel, we're going to talk a little bit more about later on, but I view it as a good expense because it's allowing me to spend more time with the people I love and allowing those relationships to build. Now, one quote I do like to think about when it comes to spending is the following: "You can have it all, but usually not all at once." And I think this is good advice to stick to, especially in your earlier stages of your career, when you have a lot of expenses piling up, when you have a bit more debt. If we spend heavily in all categories, it may start to work against us. Whereas if we focus on the categories that we truly value and align our expenses to those categories, it's bound to be more sustainable for the long haul. Now, one exercise I've been encouraged to do, I haven't done yet, is to do a check and see, are your expenses truly aligned with your value system? One thing you can do as an exercise is pull up your credit card statements and really see which major categories is the money going towards. And that can be a reality check for some people. Haven't done it myself, it may be worth doing at some point. Next section of this episode is let's talk a little bit about the biology of spending. So we're going to talk a little bit about dopamine, going back to organic chemistry. So when we buy something, we have a surge in dopamine. And dopamine is the pleasure hormone. It makes us happy. But the thing is, those surges of dopamine don't last very long. And before we know it, the dopamine comes back to our baseline level. And then often what happens is we react again. We buy something else to get that next surge of dopamine to induce pleasure. But of course, that spike is short-lived and we get our baseline levels of dopamine again. The key here is, in my view, to be less reliant on those spikes of dopamine and to learn to live a life where we are happier at those lower, more baseline levels of dopamine. So what are some tips and tricks that we can use to control our behavior and to guide our spending? First, ask yourself, is this truly a need or is it a want? Perhaps wait 1 week before buying. And if the desire to buy that item fades after a week, it was probably a want rather than a need. Next, we should make an effort to understand, broadly speaking, what our after-tax hourly rate is. And to get at this, you can take your gross annual income and divide it by 2,000, because we work around 2,000 hours a year, and then divide it by 2 again to get your after-tax rate. So take your gross income, divide it by 4,000, you get a ballpark estimate of your after-tax hourly rate. Now, you can use this strategy for big spending decisions. I wouldn't use this for going out to the restaurant every time you eat, but more decisions like, is this golf membership worth it? Is this new car worth it? Is this home renovation going to be worth it? Because you can quickly decide, how many hours would I need to work to justify this large expense? And then finally, ask yourself, will the purchase add to your life? And one test that I like to use is one that I learned from Balance by Andrew Hallam, one of my favorite personal finance books. And in this book, Andrew Hallam has a test called the Desert Island Litmus Test. And he says, before you make that purchase, ask yourself, if nobody was able to see you with that item, would you still buy it? And if the answer is no, then perhaps there's a chance that we were buying this item to maybe impress people, maybe to turn heads. Whereas if the answer is yes, I would still buy that item because it intrinsically makes me happy or it enhances my life in some way, then it's probably a very worthwhile expense. Let's move on now and tie mindful spending to the concept of control. I am a big believer that mindful spending puts us back in control. Because when we align our spending with our value system, we are then owning our possessions in a very mindful way. Instead, if we are spending willy-nilly on everything within reach, then that can get out of hand, and then our possessions can in fact start to own us. This can result in the hamster wheel phenomenon, and this is something that we want to avoid, at all costs, because this is what can lead us down the trap of doing extra shifts and extra shifts for the wrong reason. So let's understand this. There is a big difference if we are doing extra shifts because we are intrinsically motivated to do them. Maybe we want to help out our practice if the practice is behind. Maybe we want to pick up an extra shift so that we can teach a student. Sometimes I will do this and pick up extra cases when I have a student rotating with me, rather than picking up an extra shift because we have to, because the expenses are getting out of control and because the expenses are starting to control us. Maintaining control is crucial because in my view, in my experience, talking to colleagues, loss of control is one of the greatest frustrations in medicine. And loss of control is one of the leading causes of burnout. So I would say do shifts because you want to. Don't do shifts because you have to. Important to maintain control. Now let's move on to good spending. If we look at the four-legged stool that Andrew Hallam talks about in Balance, that four-legged stool talks about the pillars that result in a happy and meaningful life. And those pillars are maintaining health, having purpose, being financially stable, and then having productive and enjoyable relationships. And it turns out through Andrew Hallam's work and Dan Buttner's work and a lot of other research, it's shown that that pillar of relationships is perhaps the most important leg of that stool. If the relationships aren't intact, the other things start to matter less. So spending to enhance relationships and spending to create memories that will only compound down the road, those are generally considered to be good investments if done within reason. And you can learn more about these concepts in another great book called Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. So I want to go over a few examples of what might be a good expense versus what may be an extreme expense. And of course, this is all going to be very personal to us. But one example is, let's say you're in the market for a new set of golf clubs because you think that getting those clubs is going to force you to get out more so that you can spend more time golfing with your friends and your family. That would be generally a good expense. Whereas compare it to spending $100,000 on a golf membership on the most exclusive club in the city, but maybe you don't get out enough. And now because of that expense, maybe you have to start picking up extra shifts to cover that expense. So option number 2 there to me is probably a questionable investment for the right person, whereas buying a new set of golf clubs to enjoy the social experience through golf is probably a worthwhile expense. Let's go on to another example. I'm a big believer that traveling with 3 generations can be truly memorable. And these windows of time where we can travel with our kids and with our parents all together, that creates memories for everybody. And there's really a narrow window of time where everybody can travel together and enjoy it. So I think spending on trips like this is a wonderful expense. But I think it has to be done within reason. If these trips happen traveling first class, dining at Michelin star restaurants, and staying at expensive accommodations, which are several thousands of dollars a night, well then things are probably going to start to spiral out of control. So I think that spending to enhance relationships and spending to create memories with your kids, with your parents on trips, I think these are beautiful expenses if done in the right way. Again, making sure that how you spend in these moments is still aligned to the value system that you have set out for yourself. So guys, meaningful spending helps you maintain control, and then this allows you to invest the difference, which we're going to talk about in the next episode. And speaking of spending in a way that is aligned with your value system, this brings me to a quick story. Recently, I had a notification pop up on WhatsApp, and it said, "Bachelor party, you're invited." I thought this was going to be in Vancouver or Vegas. I got excited. I reached out to the group and they said it's actually in Hong Kong, so please set aside more time. I was shocked because 1, I haven't been to a bachelor party in a long time, and 2, traveling across the world for a bachelor party is not something that I would ordinarily do. So I set some time aside, I thought about it, I talked to my wife, and Seema quickly encouraged me to do it. She said this is going to be a great way to spend some time with your closest friends, and you're going to build some memories that are going to last a lifetime. And so I decided to pull the trigger, and one of the ways I was able to do so was through points. I've had a few episodes on travel hacks. The most recent one was last May or June. And one of the things that I did this time was I compared my options. I could have gone Air Canada with one stop on the way to Hong Kong. Round trip would have been at least 125,000 points. But what I did was I transferred my American Express points to Asia Miles, and I booked through Cathay Pacific, which gave me a direct flight to Hong Kong and back, round trip, all for 102,000 points. I felt like it was well worth it. And so this is one of the reasons why I continue to use American Express, because it does give me that versatility in terms of how I want to use the points. And so if you are interested in learning more about these topics like travel hacks, feel free to check out my episodes on this. And then I will also throw a link to my referral code for American Express cards in the show notes. And if you're in the market for a new card through American Express, feel free to check that out. Guys, thank you again for joining me. This was step 2 of the wealth formula, meaningful spending. I hope it was useful. And next week, we're going to dive into investing the difference. And until then, stay well, stay savvy.